Hello everybody, this is another lockdown special designed for the Muskham History Group and intending to keep us together until we can meet again in our meeting hall. This one's another lockdown special in 3 parts. Last year you might remember that I offered the group a vote on whether to hear the history of the English pottery industry or whether to hear about the Battle of Waterloo. The English pottery industry narrowly won that vote. So for these programs, I thought I'd tell the story of the Battle of Waterloo, 1815. But it's quite a decent story to tell in parts, so I've cut it into 3 parts, and this is part 1, the prologue to the Battle of Waterloo, 1815. Napoleon's French Empire had lasted just 10 years, during which time he and his siblings had come to rule almost all of Europe. However, his efforts to defeat his long-standing enemy in Britain by economic isolation actually managed to antagonize 2 of his allies on opposite fronts and also leave Britain with a military foothold on the mainland of Europe. His invasion of Portugal had offended Catholic Spain's alliance with the godless French, and his creation of the Duchy of Warsaw and his marriage to an Austrian princess had offended the Russian Empire with its geographical depth and mystery beyond St. Petersburg. A war on 2 fronts has been the fear of many European imperialists, and Napoleon was no exception. The battles of Espen-Isling and Wagram against the Austrians and the Prussians, and the Battle of Borodino against the Russians, had eroded his armies, and several of his heroic marshals had been killed in action. Spain was also draining his resources, and it cost him the confidence of his generals when every time they came up against Arthur Wellesley they seemed to get defeated. And the economic strangulation of Britain was hurting France and the rest of Europe far more than it was hurting Britain, because Britain had control of the seas, which Nelson had won at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Amazingly, during these latter parts of the campaign, when Napoleon was fighting on the defensive, he actually got back almost to his original military genius. But he was fighting on the defensive all the time, with fewer and fewer soldiers after each battle, and more enemies lining up against him. Each battle forced him further and further back into France, and eventually Paris was occupied and Napoleon was isolated. All of the news was bad. One of his final armies had been defeated, and his family and generals were keen to hold on to the estates and the prestige that Napoleon had bestowed on them, and encouraged him to seek a favourable truce. They begged and then demanded Napoleon's abdication as the only honourable course that he could take, and Napoleon actually offered abdication to the Allies in favour of his 3-year-old son. But the Allies refused this because it was fairly obvious that the 3-year-old son would actually be ruled by Napoleon. And under the terms of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, he eventually abdicated and would be allowed to keep his emperor title. The Emperor of Elba. Elba is a tiny island in the Tyrrhenian Sea, between Italy and Napoleon's birthplace of Corsica. It was where Napoleon was banished to from mainland France after his surrender. And Europe returned to the stability of monarchies in every country, with King Louis XVIII being returned to the French throne. Louis XVIII was restored to the French throne under the Treaty of Versailles, but unfortunately he was not a popular king. The French population increasingly wished the years of Napoleon could return. They often remembered why they had had a revolution in the first place. Louis XVIII also made the mistake of cutting off Napoleon's promised stipend of 1,000,000 francs a year. And Napoleon, sensing that all was not well through his intelligence network, planned a comeback. Napoleon had a small navy on Elma and also a small army. So, on the 26th of February 1815, Napoleon sails for France on his brig Inconstant. He brings with him his army of 700 men. He lands at Golfe-Juan and marches north. Just south of Grenoble, he meets a French force which has been sent to intercept him and take him prisoner. It's the French 5th Regiment of the Guard, under the command of Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's favourite generals. Ney had promised to bring Napoleon back to Paris in an iron cage. Now we see the bravery of Napoleon as he steps out in front of his small army, bares his chest from his greatcoat, and invites someone of the 5th Regiment to shoot him. Here is your emperor. If you want to kill him, shoot now. And instead, all the troops shout "Vive l'Empereur," and they go over to Napoleon. His army grows from 700 to more than 7,000 in this single engagement. Ney offers his sword and offers to surrender, but Napoleon says, "No, you're one of my marshals. Keep your sword and let's march to Paris together." Louis XVIII flees from Paris to Belgium, recognizing that there is a problem on its way. And Napoleon once again takes up the crown as emperor. Within a few weeks, he has completely regained power over most of France. Every force that was sent to stop his advance goes over to his side. On March the 20th, he arrives in Paris, and by June, he has established an army of 200,000 men once again. Napoleon is again Emperor of France. But the whole of Europe takes up arms against him. The European nations do not declare war on France. France is a monarchy state ruled by Louis XVIII, and the fact that he just doesn't happen to be there has nothing to do with it. They still don't make war on France, they make war on the person of Napoleon Bonaparte. This sort of has shades of Osama bin Laden in our own recent times. Can Napoleon initiate the Waterloo campaign with one of his famous strategic surprises? He is aware that Wellington has a multinational army based on Brussels. He also knows that Gerhard Blücher has an army of Prussians based on and around Namur. and the Austrians and Russians are advancing towards the west, but as yet are still in the depths of Europe. Could Napoleon find his great flair and genius to defeat the European armies piecemeal once again? First, let's smash Blucher and the Prussians. Then turn to Wellington, the nemesis of his generals in Spain, and send his mongrel army reeling off the field of battle. Then back to Paris and wait for the Austrians or the Russians to arrive. And meet the Austrians as soon as they enter France. Then travel down and defeat the Austrians as he had done at Ulm and Austerlitz. The Russians will not fight alone when they know that the Austrians, the British, and the Prussians have been beaten from the field. They will simply go home. They will sue for peace, and the war will be over. Then back to Paris, and there once again to be crowned Emperor of France and to become the undisputed master of Europe. Ah, the dreams that come to you when you're lying on the floor with your eyes half closed and gazing at a map of Europe. So will Napoleon manage to make his dreams come true? Well, let's go on to part 2. Part 2 is again located in YouTube, the Muskham History Group section, Waterloo 1815 Part 2. Hope to see you there. In the meantime, stay well, stay healthy, stay safe, stay secure, and most of all, stay fit. Hope to see you in part 2. Bye now.